Echoes from the Edge, a deep dive into the lost cults, sunken worlds, and bizarre beings of myth. Part 1, The Divine Frenzy, Ecstatic Dances and Divine Attendants. In the shadowed corners of classical mythology, far from the stately pronouncements of the Olympian gods, there exists a wilder, more primal stratum of belief. This is a world not of reasoned debate in the agora, but of percussive, heart-pounding rhythms in the mountain wilderness, a world of ecstatic frenzy, where the lines between God and mortal, sanity and madness, creation and destruction blur into a terrifying, divine dance. At the heart of this chaos are the divine attendants, the semi-divine beings who serve not as placid courtiers but as conduits of a raw, untamable power. They are the guardians of infant gods, the initiators of mortals, and the living embodiment of a religious fervor that both fascinated and horrified the more structured societies of Greece and Rome. To understand them is to listen for the oldest, strangest heartbeat of the ancient world. Chapter 1, The Charybants, Cybele's Clashing Cohort. The Phrygian Heartbeat. Long before the Greek pantheon was codified, in the mountainous highlands of Anatolia, a different kind of power held sway. This was the domain of the Great Mother, a formidable nature goddess known to the Phrygians as Cybele. She was the Mountain Mother, a deity whose power was rooted in the untamed wilderness, in the latent ferocity of the land itself. Her processions were a spectacle of foreign, exotic mystery. She arrived in a chariot drawn not by horses, but by lions, symbols of her mastery over wild nature, to the accompaniment of chaotic music and a disorderly, ecstatic following. In her cult center at Pessinus, on the slopes of Mount Vindemus, she was not represented by a graceful anthropomorphic statue, but by an aniconic stone of black meteoric iron, a piece of the heavens that had fallen to earth, raw and unshaped like the power she embodied. When her worship was brought to Rome in 204 BCE during the dire days of the Second Punic War, it was this sacred stone, believed to be the Idaean Mother, that was installed in the city as a key religious ally. At the heart of her wild retinue, serving as the rhythm section for her chaotic rites, were the Charybants. They were the armed and crested dancers, her mythical attendants who worshipped her with a symphony of percussive sound and Bacchic frenzy. The Symphony of Chaos, deconstructing the ecstatic dance. The central ritual of the Charybants was the Charybas, an orgiastic war dance designed not for entertainment, but for transcendence. They were, as one source describes them, a kind of inspired people, whose goal was to induce a state of religious madness in themselves and their audience. Clad in armor, with high-crested helmets, they would dance with frenetic, warlike movements, clashing their spears against their brazen shields. This martial clanging was accompanied by the beat of cymbals, drums, and tambourines, instruments they were credited with inventing, and the ecstatic cries of the devotees. The effect was a wall of overwhelming, rhythmic noise, a sensory assault intended to shatter the boundaries of the self and open a channel to the divine. This was not a celebration of order, but an invocation of chaos. The purpose of their rites was to inspire terror and awe, to replicate the wild, untamable power of their goddess. The dance itself was claimed to have healing properties, particularly for mental disorders, suggesting it was a form of ritual catharsis, a way to purge inner turmoil by surrendering to an external, overwhelming force. In celebrating the rites of the Great Mother, they acted like men possessed, their movements so distinctive that the Greeks had a word for it, charybantizing, to be in a state of religious frenzy. A tangled family tree. As with many primordial beings, the origins of the Charybants are a maddeningly contradictory tangle, a testament to their mysterious and liminal nature. Ancient writers seemed unable to agree on their parentage, offering a host of divine candidates that only deepens the enigma. Pseudo-Apollodorus claims they were the offspring of the god of order, Apollo, and the muse of comedy, Thalia, a strange pairing for such a chaotic cohort. Strabo, citing other sources, suggests their parents were Apollo and the nymph Rhetia, or perhaps Zeus and the muse of epic poetry, Calliope. Still other accounts attest their parentage to Helios the sun and Athena, or even to the old titan Cronus himself. This genealogical confusion is not a sign of poor record-keeping but a feature of their myth. They exist at the crossroads of different divine principles, order and chaos, music and war, sky and earth. One tradition even traces their name to a mortal, Charybas, the son of a Samothracian prince and Cybele herself, who brought his mother's rites to Phrygia and named her ecstatic followers after himself. Another version tells that the Titans gave the Charybants, who hailed from Colchis, to the goddess Rhea as armed ministers. They are at once demigods, priests, and superhuman beings, their origins as scattered and wild as their dance. Guardians of the god-child. Beyond their service to Cybele, the Charybants were often tasked with a sacred duty, the protection of a divine infant. They are named as the guardians of the young Dionysus, another god whose cult was marked by wild ecstasy and foreign origins. In this role, their armed dance served a practical purpose. They would surround the infant god, clashing their swords and shields to conceal the sounds of his boyhood and protect him from his enemies. This function caused them to be frequently confused and conflated with another group of divine guardians, the Cretan curates. Through this identification, the Charybants were folded into the most critical succession myth of the Greek pantheon, the protection of the infant Zeus from his child-devouring father, Cronus. In this context, their percussive symphony of chaos became a divine decoy, a wall of sound intended to drown out the baby's cries and ensure the survival of the future king of the gods. The Roman afterlife, blood and ecstasy. When the cult of Cybele, the Magna Mater or Great Mother, arrived in Rome, its ecstatic rites were almost too much for the famously stoic Roman temperament. The worship was raw, bloody, and deeply unsettling to the established order. Cybele's priests, known as the Galli, were eunuchs who castrated themselves upon entering her service, a ritual reenactment of the myth of her mortal lover, Attis, who had emasculated himself under a pine tree. The annual festival of Cybele, held in March, culminated in the Day of Blood, Dies Sanguinis. On this day, to the frenzied music of cymbals, drums, and flutes, the lower clergy would whirl madly, slashing themselves with knives to bespatter the altar and a sacred pine tree representing Attis with their own blood. The chief priest, the Archigallus, would draw blood from his arms and offer it to the goddess. These rites, so at home in Anatolia, were deemed too frenzied for Europeans. For a time, Roman citizens were strictly forbidden from taking part in the ceremonies or serving as priests, a ban that was not lifted until the imperial era. Even in a 15th-century Christian manuscript depicting the rites, the followers of Cybele are shown in a state of bizarre rapture, their eyes and gestures pointing to a banner proclaiming their love of the moon, a scene of strange, otherworldly devotion that still captivated artists centuries later. The Corybantes, as the mythological archetypes of this divine madness, represented a powerful and dangerous form of worship that Rome embraced cautiously, recognizing in their clashing shields the echoes of a power both divine and deeply alien. The persistent association of the Corybantes with Phrygia and Anatolia reveals their function as a point of cultural transmission. Their wild, foreign, rites were both fascinating and terrifying to the more structured Greek and Roman worlds, embodying the exotic other. The sources repeatedly link them to Phrygia and the goddess Cybele, who is explicitly identified as an Anatolian deity. Greek and Roman writers describe their rituals as orgiastic and frenzied, terms often used to distinguish foreign cults from more staid local traditions. The Roman reaction, initially banning its own citizens from participating in the bloody rites, confirms that the cult was perceived as dangerously alien. Thus, the Corybantes are more than just mythological figures, they are symbolic representations of how Greco-Roman culture grappled with, absorbed, and was ultimately transformed by the powerful mystery cults of the East. Chapter 2. The Curiates, Guardians of the Divine Child. The Cretan Connection. If the Corybantes were the sound of Anatolian frenzy, the Curiates were their echo on the island of Crete. Often identified with the Corybantes, they were a distinct group of minor gods or daimons, young warriors intimately connected with the Cretan Great Mother, Rhea, and the birth of her son, Zeus. Their very name is identical with Korwa, the Greek word for young men, linking them directly to the youths of Crete. Like many primordial beings, their origins are chthonic and mysterious. One legend holds that they were not born in the conventional sense but sprang directly from the earth of Crete when the first tears of the newborn Zeus watered the ground, a story that cements their status as indigenous spirits of the island. Another tradition, recorded by Ovid, claims they were born from rainwater when Uranus fertilized Gaia, suggesting a connection to the life-giving Hyades. This earth-born nature made them the mythical first inhabitants of Crete, the island's name itself possibly deriving from their own. The divine decoy. The Curiates are best known for their central role in the myth of Zeus's infancy, a tale of divine subterfuge and protective chaos. When Rhea sought to save her final child from being devoured by her husband Cronus, she fled to a steep, forested cave on Crete, either Mount Ida or Mount Dicte, and entrusted the infant Zeus to the care of the Curiates. Here, the Curiates performed their most sacred and bizarre duty. To hide the baby from Cronus, who was the ruler of land, sea, and sky, they devised a clever invention, a hanging cradle. Suspended in the cave, the infant Zeus touched neither the earth, nor the sea, nor the sky, rendering him invisible to his father's dominion. But their greatest trick was one of sound. To drown out the cries of the divine infant, the Curiates engaged in a loud, clamorous war dance, the Pyrrhic dance. They beat their swords against their brazen shields, stomped their feet, and raised a wild clamor that echoed through the mountains, ensuring that Cronus would hear only the din of their ritual and not the wails of his heir. Archaeological finds from the Idaean cave, including spectacular decorated bronze shields from the 8th to 6th centuries BCE, suggest that this myth was rooted in actual rituals performed by human Korwa reenacting the birth of their god. Founders, inventors, and initiators. The Curiates were far more than divine babysitters, they were remembered as primordial culture bringers who civilized the island of Crete. Legend credits them with a host of foundational inventions. They were the first to teach humans the art of hunting and created the first bow. They developed animal husbandry, beekeeping, and metallurgy. The very rhythms of Cretan culture were said to stem from them. The traditional Cretan dances like the Pentasali are believed to be descendants of the Curiates' Pyrrhic dance, and the first drum was supposedly made by them and gifted to Rhea. Even the Olympic Games are traced back to their playful contests. According to one legend, the 5 Curiate brothers, on an excursion in the Peloponnesus, decided to race each other for fun. The eldest, a Cretan Heracles not to be confused with the famous son of Zeus, won and was crowned with a wreath of wild olive. He then decreed that the games should be held every 5 years, one for each brother. Beyond these inventions, their armed dance served as a crucial coming-of-age ritual. In Cretan cities, the transition of boys Korwa into manhood was deeply connected to the Curiates and to the Cretan Zeus, who was himself called the greatest Kuros. The dance, a celebration of warrior prowess, was a form of initiation, transforming boys into men, just as they had protected the boy god who would become king. The Lion's Wrath. The strangest and most violent chapter of the Curiates myth involves their ultimate fate at the hands of the very god they sought to deceive. In one shocking account, Cronus discovered their ruse. Enraged, he transformed the guardians of Zeus into lions. This act of vengeance, however, was subverted by the gods they served. Zeus, in gratitude for their protection, honored the transformed Curiates by making them the kings of the animal world. Rhea, their mistress, then completed the transformation by yoking the lion Curiates to her chariot. This bizarre tale provides a powerful mythological explanation for the ever-present lions that accompany the Great Mother Goddess in her iconography, whether she is called Rhea or Cybele. The wild beasts that pull her chariot are not just animals, they are the transformed primordial guardians of her son, their savage nature now harnessed in eternal service to the divine order they helped to create. The story of the Curates is a microcosm of the entire Greek succession myth, embodying the transition from chaos to order. Cronus represents a destructive, consuming force, he eats his children, symbolizing the old, chaotic order. The Curates, tasked by Rhea, use chaos to protect the future king of the cosmos. Their method is to create a purposeful, protective chaos, a symphony of chaos, with their clashing weapons to defeat the uncontrolled chaos of Cronus. Their final transformation into lions and their subsequent harnessing by Rhea symbolizes this principle perfectly. Their wild, primordial nature is not destroyed but is tamed and integrated into the service of the new divine order, becoming the very power that pulls the chariot of the Great Mother. Chapter 3, The Dactyls, Gaia's finger-forged magicians. Born from the Earth script. Even more ancient and chthonic than the Charybants or Curates were the Dactyls. Their origin story is one of the most bizarre and elemental in all of mythology, tying them not to the sky or the sea, but to the very soil of the earth. The legend, set on the sacred Mount Ida in either Crete or Phrygia, tells that as the Great Mother, sometimes identified as Rhea, other times as the nymph Anchial, was in the throes of labor, she squatted and dug her fingers deep into the earth Gaia to brace herself. From the 10 impressions her fingers left in the soil, a new race of beings sprang forth, the Dactyloidoi, the Idaean fingers. Their name was a direct reflection of their birth, and their number was often said to be 10, 5 male and 5 female, corresponding to the fingers of both hands. However, as with all such primal spirits, their numbers were wildly inconsistent across different traditions. Sometimes there were only 3, sometimes 33, and in some accounts, they were multiplied into a race of 100. This strange, earthy birth established them as beings intrinsically linked to the secrets and resources hidden within the ground. Masters of the forge and the spell. The Dactyls were remembered primarily as the world's first smiths and powerful healing magicians. They were the mythical beings who discovered iron and invented the art of metallurgy, teaching humanity how to work metals with fire. Their craft was not seen as mere artisanship but as a form of sorcery, an uncanny art that transformed dull rock into gleaming, powerful tools and weapons. As the scholar Jane Ellen Harrison noted, among primitive peoples, the smith is half medicine man. The traditions name 3 Phrygian dactyls who personify the smithing process itself, Ikmon, whose name means the anvil, Damnamonius, the hammer, and Selmus, casting. They were said to be in the employ of the great smith god Hephaestus, and in addition to metalworking, they were credited with teaching mathematics and the alphabet to humans. They were also associated with healing, with 3 Cretan dactyls bearing names suggestive of this power, Pionios associated with Asclepius Epimedes and Yazios. The unfortunate Selmus. A strange and cautionary tale is told of the dactyl Selmus, highlighting the dangerous proximity of these beings to the gods. Selmus was a childhood companion of Zeus, one of his most faithful friends during his infancy in the Cretan cave. However, he somehow offended Zeus's mother, Rhea. In one version, Rhea asked Zeus to punish her offender, and the god obliged by transforming Selmus into a block of diamond-hard adamant, like a tempered blade. In another version, Selmus was turned directly into iron for his transgression. This magical punishment is a perfect, ironic reflection of his own craft. The master of metal becomes metal himself, a permanent and unyielding monument to the wrath of a goddess. Progenitors and synonyms. The dactyls were considered so ancient that they were often seen as the ancestors of the other ecstatic groups. Strabo reports that many suspected both the Curates and the Charybants were the offspring of the Idaean dactyls. This leads to a hopelessly circular and tangled genealogy that defies any logical ordering. One account claims the first 100 men born in Crete were called Idaean dactyls. Another says these 100 dactyls were born from 9 Curates, each of whom begot 10 children. This confusion underscores their primordial status. They exist at the very root of these mythic traditions, so ancient that their relationship to their successors is a blur of interchangeable identities. They were also identified with other mysterious groups, such as the Telchines of Rhodes, dangerous underworld smiths and magicians, and the Cabiri of Samothrace, whose secret cults involved magical practices. The myth of the dactyls represents the dawn of technology as a magical, chthonic force. Their very name, fingers, and their birth from Rhea digging her hands into the earth is a powerful metaphor for humanity's first hands-on interaction with the natural world. In early societies, the ability to transform rock into metal was a profound and almost terrifying power, a secret knowledge that seemed to be wrested from the earth itself. The dactyls, as the discoverers of this art, are the mythologized figures of this pivotal moment in human development. The story of Selmus being turned into iron is the perfect mythic expression of this concept. The master of the craft becomes one with his material, a cautionary tale about the awesome and dangerous power they had unleashed. Chapter 4, The Maenads, Dionysus's Wild Women. The Female Frenzy. In stark contrast to the male-dominated confraternities of the Charybants, Curates, and Dactyls, there existed a uniquely female expression of divine madness, the Maenads. Their name in Greek, Mainomai, literally means to rave, and they were the mortal female followers of Dionysus, the god of wine, mystery, and intoxication. When possessed by his spirit, these women would leave their homes and cities, abandoning the structured norms of society to wander through the forests and mountains in a state of ecstatic worship. Their appearance was a deliberate rejection of civilization. They were clad in fawn skins, symbolizing their connection to the wild, and crowned with wreaths of ivy or smilax. Their hair flowed freely, and in their hands they wielded the thyrsus, a long staff of fennel wrapped with ivy and topped with a pine cone, a symbol of Dionysian power and fertility. They were the god's sacred entourage, his bodyguard corps, and through their wild dances and hymns, they were believed to channel his presence, becoming his physical manifestation on earth. Rituals of blood and ecstasy. The rituals of the Maenads were conducted in remote, wild locations, far from the eyes of the uninitiated. Their worship was not one of quiet contemplation but of intense, physical release. Stimulated by high-pitched music from the aulos, an oboe-like instrument, and the beat of the tympanon, a drum, they would engage in whirling dances under the flicker of torches, shouting the ritual cry, Yuhoi, shaking their heads, jumping, and running until they collapsed in a state of euphoric exhaustion. But their rites had a darker, more terrifying side. Two practices in particular have cemented their reputation as figures of primal horror. Sparagmos, this was the ritual dismemberment of a live animal, or, in some myths, a human victim, torn apart with their bare hands. This act was not seen as mere savagery, but as a sacred rite symbolizing the dissolution of boundaries between the human and the natural, the civilized and the wild. Omophagia. Following the sparagmos, the Maenads would engage in omophagia, the consumption of the victim's raw flesh. This was the ultimate act of communion with their god, a way to absorb the vital, untamed essence of Dionysus himself and achieve a state of divine union. Terrifying tales of divine retribution. The myths surrounding the Maenads are cautionary tales about the dire consequences of denying the power of Dionysus. The most famous of these is the tragedy of Pentheus, the young king of Thebes. As told in Euripides' play The Bacchae, Pentheus banned the worship of the new god and attempted to imprison his followers. In response, Dionysus drove the women of Thebes, including Pentheus's own mother, Agave, into a Maenadic frenzy on the mountainside. The god then lured the disguised king to spy on their secret rites. The frenzied women discovered him, and in their madness, mistook him for a wild mountain lion. They fell upon him, and his own mother was the first to tear him limb from limb, returning to the city in triumph with her son's head impaled on her thyrsus. Another legendary figure who met his end at their hands was the musician Orpheus. After losing his wife Eurydice for a second time, he forsook the company of women. The Maenads, offended by his rejection of them and their god, attacked him during one of their rituals, tearing him to pieces and throwing his head into the river Hebrus, where it continued to sing. The duality of Dionysus. The Maenads are the perfect embodiment of the complex and dual nature of their god. Dionysus represents liberation, joy, and ecstatic freedom from societal constraints, but he also embodies chaos, madness, and shocking violence. The Maenads' rituals could lead to a profound sense of unity with the divine and the natural world, a transcendent experience of freedom. Yet, that same divine energy, when resisted or rejected, could manifest as a destructive, murderous rage. They exist on the razor's edge between ecstasy and madness, symbolizing the untamed aspects of human nature that civilization seeks to control, but can never fully extinguish. In a society where women were largely confined to the domestic sphere, the Maenadic rituals offered a sanctioned, albeit temporary, subversion of the patriarchal social order. The call to the mountains was a summons to leave the confines of the city and the home. Their actions, letting their hair down, wearing animal skins, engaging in wild, uninhibited dances, were all symbolic reversals of civilized, orderly female behavior. The myths of them destroying powerful male figures like King Pentheus and the cultural hero Orpheus highlight a symbolic overthrow of male authority. However, because this was a biennial ritual, integrated into the city's religious calendar, it functioned as a societal release valve. It allowed for the expression of repressed female energy in a controlled context, ultimately reinforcing the normal social structure by containing the chaos within a specific time and place, preventing it from boiling over and truly threatening the established order. Table 1. Comparative analysis of ecstatic cults. Group: primary deity, geographic origin, key rituals, gender, core mythological function. Charybdis, Cybele, Rhea, Phrygia, Samothrace, armed dance, Charybdis, percussive music, inducing frenzy, male, attendants to the Great Mother, guardians of infant Dionysus, Curates, Rhea, Zeus, Crete, armed dance, Pyrrhic, guarding infant Zeus, initiation rites, male, guardians of the divine child, primordial culture bringers, dactyls, Rhea, Gaia, Mount Ida, Crete, Phrygia, metallurgy, magic, healing, discovery of iron, male, primordial technologists and magicians, ancestors of other groups, Maenads, Dionysus, Thebes. Thrace, Sparagmos, omophagia, ecstatic dance, thyrsus wielding, female agents of divine ecstasy and retribution, embodiment of wild nature, Part 2, Beyond the Map, Lost Lands and Utopian Realms. The ancient Greek imagination was not confined to the familiar shores of the Aegean. It stretched to the edges of the known world and beyond, populating the vast, uncharted territories with fantastical peoples and legendary lands. These were not mere flights of fancy, but complex thought experiments, mythological canvases upon which the Greeks painted their deepest anxieties about civilization and their highest aspirations for humanity. From the sun-drenched paradise beyond the north wind to the hubristic superpower swallowed by the sea, these lost worlds served as mirrors, reflecting the virtues and vices of the Greeks themselves and exploring the eternal question of what it means to build a perfect society and how easily it can be lost. Chapter 5, Hyperborea, the paradise beyond the north wind. A land of eternal spring. In the far north, at the very edge of the world, lay a fabulous realm known as Hyperborea. Its name literally meant, beyond the north wind, for it was a place so remote that it was untouched by the cold breath of Boreas, the icy god of the north wind who was thought to dwell in the Riphean mountains. South of these impassable, gold-guarded peaks was a desolate, snow-covered wasteland, but beyond them lay a paradise. Hyperborea was a land of eternal spring, blessed with an unusually temperate climate where the fertile earth produced 2 crops of grain each year. Much of the land was covered in beautiful, wild forests, a place so sacred and pristine it was known as the Garden of Apollon. The blessed race. The inhabitants of this utopia, the Hyperboreans, were a blessed and sacred race. The Greek poet Pindar wrote of them, "No sickness or ruinous old age is mixed into that sacred race, without toil or battles they live without fear of strict nemesis." They were a people who lived for 1,000 years, untouched by war, hard labor, or disease. Their lives were dedicated to the worship of Apollo, who was said to spend the winter months among them while Dionysus took his place at Delphi. The Hyperboreans were, in essence, a nation of his priests, ruled by 3 gigantic kings known as the Boreads, sons of the North Wind himself. In their capital stood a great circular temple to Apollo, where they offered him peculiar sacrifices, hecatombs of asses, a practice that the god apparently found amusing. Their entire existence was an eternal festival of music, song, and dance, their hymns joined by the sweet songs of the white swans that flocked to the river Eridanos. The bliss of voluntary death. Perhaps the strangest and most counterintuitive custom of this blessed race was their approach to death. Untouched by old age or sickness, a Hyperborean's life did not end in tragedy or decay. Instead, when they had lived for their allotted 1,000 years and were fully sated with life, they would hold a final banquet, anoint themselves, and deck their bodies with garlands. Then, they would proceed to a specific rock and leap from it into the sea. This act of voluntary death was not considered a tragedy but the most blissful form of burial, a final, joyful release after a full and perfect life. In another bizarre tradition, elderly Hyperboreans would commemorate the fall of Phaethon into the river Eridanos by leaping into the same waters, where they would be transformed into white swans. Mythic connections. Though isolated, Hyperborea was woven into the fabric of Greek myth. It was from this northern paradise that Heracles, when founding the Olympic Games, made a pilgrimage to obtain sacred wild olive trees to plant at the shrine. The goddess Leto, pregnant with Apollo and Artemis, was said to have traveled from Hyperborea to the island of Delos, accompanied by a pack of wolves, to give birth. In honor of this connection, the Hyperboreans would send sacred offerings to the shrine at Delos. A tragic legend recorded by Herodotus tells that the first pilgrims, a group of maidens, were either killed or simply never returned. Fearing for the safety of their people, the Hyperboreans devised a new system. They would wrap their offerings in wheat straw and pass them from nation to nation, a sacred relay that would eventually carry the gifts all the way to Delos without risking their own lives. Grounding the myth. While Hyperborea was clearly a mythical paradise, some ancient writers attempted to place it in the real world. Herodotus, expressing his own skepticism, located it in the region north of the Black Sea, beyond the lands of the Scythians. Pindar connected it with the Danube River. Later theorists have suggested Celtic Britain as a candidate. A more plausible explanation for the myth's origin may lie in natural phenomena. The Greeks, living in the Mediterranean, may have heard exaggerated tales from northern traders about the land of the midnight sun, where the summer days were incredibly long. These stories of a land of eternal light could easily have been mythologized into a paradise of eternal spring. Ultimately, Hyperborea functions as a spiritual north, a mythological pole of perfect order and harmony that stands in stark contrast to the passionate, chaotic, and tragic world of the Greeks. It is a thought experiment about a society completely devoted to a single, orderly principle, the Apollonian ideal. The land is defined by what it lacks: sickness, war, old age, and even nemesis, the divine punishment for hubris. This is a negation of the core struggles of Greek epic and tragedy. The custom of voluntary death is the ultimate expression of this perfect order. Life is not tragically cut short by fate Moira, it is a complete and satisfying arc that one chooses to end. Hyperborea is not a place to be found on a map, but a philosophical ideal, the world as it could be if the Apollonian principle reigned supreme. Chapter 6, Atlantis, the cautionary tale of a sunken superpower. Plato's Republic of the Sea. The most famous lost land of all, Atlantis, comes to us from a single source, the dialogues of the Greek philosopher Plato, written around 360 BCE. In his works Timaeus and Critias, Plato, through the voice of the character Critias, tells a story he claims was passed down from the Athenian statesman Solon, who in turn heard it from Egyptian priests. The story describes a mighty island civilization that existed 9,000 years before Plato's time. Located in the Atlantic Ocean just beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the Strait of Gibraltar, this island, named Atlantis, was immense, larger than Libya and Asia combined. It was a veritable paradise, founded by the sea god Poseidon, who fell in love with a mortal woman then named Clito. For her, he crafted a capital city of extraordinary design, a series of concentric rings of land and water, linked by a grand canal that ran to the sea. The land was rich with every resource, from exotic wildlife to precious metals like gold and silver. Most prized of all was a mysterious, gleaming red metal unique to the island, orichalcum. The inhabitants, a race of demigods descended from Poseidon, built a magnificent, technologically advanced utopian society and became a great naval power. Hubris and downfall. For generations, the Atlanteans lived as a noble and virtuous people. But as their divine blood thinned over time, they became corrupted by greed, avarice, and a lust for power. No longer content with their own paradise, they launched a massive military campaign, conquering lands across North Africa as far as Egypt and across Europe as far as Italy. Their goal was to enslave the entire Mediterranean world. According to Plato's tale, only one power stood against them, a primordial, morally pure Athens, an idealized version of Plato's own city. The ancient Athenians, embodying the virtues of the ideal state, single-handedly defeated the mighty Atlantean invaders and liberated the conquered peoples. But the final judgment came from the gods. Angered by the Atlanteans' hubris and moral decay, Zeus and the other gods unleashed a cataclysm. In a single day and night of misfortune, violent earthquakes and floods racked the island, and the great civilization of Atlantis sank beneath the waves, vanishing from the world forever. The search for a lost world, the craziest theories. Though Plato's story was likely intended as a fable, it has inspired centuries of speculation and a fervent search for the lost continent. The idea that Atlantis was a real historical place gained massive popularity in the late 19th century with the writer Ignatius Donnelly. In his 1882 book, Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, Donnelly argued that all the great accomplishments of the ancient world, metallurgy, agriculture, language, must have been passed down from a single, highly advanced mother culture, which he identified as Atlantis. He imagined a continent in the mid-Atlantic, precisely where Plato located it, which suddenly sank beneath the waves. Donnelly's theories, though long debunked by modern oceanography and plate tectonics, opened the floodgates for even more imaginative speculation. Some of the most bizarre and unconventional theories include the Bermuda Triangle connection. In the 1970s, paranormal writer Charles Berlitz claimed that Atlantis was a real continent located off the coast of the Bahamas and that its destruction was linked to the mysterious forces of the Bermuda Triangle. Proponents point to the Bimini Road, an underwater rock formation that resembles a man-made wall, though geologists have identified it as a natural phenomenon. Atlantis as Antarctica, another fringe theory, popularized by Charles Hapgood in his 1958 book Earth-Shifting Crust, posits that Atlantis was actually a temperate version of modern-day Antarctica. Hapgood proposed a now discredited geological theory of crustal displacement, suggesting that a sudden shift of the Earth's crust moved the continent from a warmer latitude to its current polar location, burying the advanced Atlantean civilization under miles of ice. More plausible though still highly debated theories suggest Plato's story may have been inspired by real historical events, such as the catastrophic volcanic eruption on the island of Thera, modern Santorini, around 1600 BCE, which devastated the highly advanced Minoan civilization on nearby Crete. Another candidate is the Greek city of Helig, which was destroyed by an earthquake and sank into the Gulf of Corinth in 373 BCE, during Plato's own lifetime. The allegory unveiled. Despite the endless speculation, the vast majority of historians and scholars agree that Atlantis never existed as a physical place. It was a philosophical invention, a powerful allegory created by Plato to serve several of his favorite themes. The story of Atlantis is a cautionary tale about the corrupting influence of power and wealth and the divine punishment that awaits a society that succumbs to hubris. The Atlantis myth is a foundational example of a fall of empire narrative, a political allegory disguised as history. The story is framed as a conflict between a corrupt, wealthy, expansionist sea power Atlantis and a virtuous, restrained, land-based democracy primordial Athens. This narrative directly mirrors the real-world political situation of Plato's time. Athens itself had become an expansionist sea power and suffered a devastating defeat in the Peloponnesian War, a conflict many Greeks attributed to Athenian hubris. Plato, therefore, was not writing history, he was creating a mythic past to comment on his present. He projected Athens' own flaws onto the fictional, other, of Atlantis and presented an idealized, imaginary version of Athens as the hero. The story is a brilliant piece of political philosophy, a timeless warning that has captivated the human imagination for millennia precisely because its fusion of utopian fantasy and apocalyptic destruction speaks to the rise and fall of every great power. Chapter 7, The Labyrinth of Crete, a Maze of Myth and Meaning. The Monster and the Maze. At the heart of Minoan Crete, in the legendary palace of Knossos, lay one of mythology's most enduring and psychologically potent structures, the labyrinth. The story begins with an act of divine transgression. King Minos of Crete, to prove his right to rule, prayed to Poseidon to send him a bull from the sea, which he promised to sacrifice. A magnificent white bull emerged from the waves, but Minos, captivated by its beauty, decided to keep it and sacrifice another in its place. Angered by this betrayal, Poseidon enacted a terrible revenge. He caused Minos's wife, Queen Pasiphae, to be afflicted with an unnatural lust for the bull. Consumed by her desire, Pasiphae enlisted the help of the master craftsman and inventor, Daedalus. Daedalus constructed a hollow wooden cow, covered it with a real cow's hide, and wheeled it into the pasture where the queen could hide inside. The bull was deceived, and from this unnatural union, a monstrous offspring was born, Asterion, the Minotaur, a creature with the body of a man and the head of a bull, who craved only human flesh. Horrified and shamed, Minos commanded Daedalus to build an inescapable prison to contain the monster. Daedalus designed the labyrinth, an elaborate structure of intricate, diabolically confusing passages, so cunningly made that even he could barely find his way out after completing it. To feed the beast, Minos exacted a gruesome tribute from the city of Athens, which he had defeated in war. Every 7 or 9 years, 7 Athenian youths and 7 maidens were sent to Crete to be cast into the labyrinth and devoured by the Minotaur. The thread of salvation. This reign of terror continued until the Athenian hero Theseus, son of King Aegeus, volunteered to be one of the tributes, vowing to slay the Minotaur. When he arrived in Crete, Minos's daughter, the princess Ariadne, fell in love with him. Desperate to save him, she sought help from Daedalus, the labyrinth's creator. He gave her a simple but ingenious solution, a ball of thread. Theseus entered the dark, twisting passages of the labyrinth, tying one end of the thread to the entrance and unspooling it as he went. He found the Minotaur in the central chamber, and after a ferocious battle, he killed the beast with his sword. Following the thread back through the maze, he escaped the darkness and led the other Athenian tributes to freedom. Searching for the labyrinth. For centuries, the labyrinth was thought to be pure myth. But in the early 20th century, the archaeologist Sir Arthur Evans began excavating a sprawling, multi-acre ruin at Knossos. He uncovered a massive palace complex with a bewildering array of rooms, corridors, and staircases arranged with no apparent central axis, creating a confusing, maze-like layout. Evans became convinced that this was the historical basis for the labyrinth. His theory was bolstered by the prevalence of a particular symbol carved throughout the palace walls, the labrys, or double-headed axe. Evans and others speculated that the word labyrinth might mean house of the double axe, directly linking the myth to the site. However, other candidates for the labyrinth exist. About 30 miles south of Knossos, near the ancient city of Gortyn, lies a massive, ancient quarry cave. This cave is not a simple maze but a complex system of underground corridors and chambers stretching for miles, which gives a profoundly labyrinthine impression to any who enter. This cave was used as a quarry for the palaces at Phaistos and Gortyn and was known to locals for centuries as the Labyrinth Cave. Some ancient Roman authors even located the labyrinth near Gortyn, not Knossos, suggesting the location of the myth may have shifted over time. The labyrinth as a symbol. Whether inspired by a palace or a cave, the labyrinth's true power lies in its symbolism. It is more than just a physical space, it is a map of the human psyche. The journey into the labyrinth's twisting passages represents a descent into the subconscious, a confrontation with the beast within. The Minotaur, with its hybrid form, symbolizes the dark, bestial, repressed parts of human nature, the ID, the shadow self. Across many cultures, labyrinths are designed not as traps, but as paths for spiritual growth and initiation. Unlike a maze, a true labyrinth has only one path, it is unicursal, that leads to the center and back out again. The walk is a form of moving meditation, a rite of passage where one enters with a question and emerges with enlightenment. The myth of the labyrinth can be understood as a coming-of-age ritual. The youths enter the darkness, wrestle with their demons, the Minotaur experience a symbolic death and rebirth, and emerge as adults, ready to take their place in society. The myth of the labyrinth represents the civilizing process of containing and confronting the monstrous chaos of the primal self. The Minotaur, born from an act of hubris and unnatural lust, is an eruption of chaotic desire. King Minos, the representative of civic order, cannot destroy this chaos but must contain it. He commissions Daedalus, the master of reason and technology, to build a structure for this purpose. The labyrinth is therefore the architectural manifestation of rational control imposed upon the irrational beast, a prison of logic for a monster of instinct. Theseus's journey is not just about killing a monster, it is about navigating this complex structure of reason to confront the chaos at its heart and return to the light. Ariadne's thread, in this interpretation, symbolizes the guiding principle of love, wisdom, or memory needed to undertake this perilous psychological journey without becoming lost in the darkness of one's own mind. Part 3, a bestiary of the bizarre, monsters, demons, and primordial beings. The ancient world was populated by more than just gods and mortals. In the dark forests, beneath the earth, and at the edges of civilization lurked monstrous beings, creatures whose very existence defied the natural order. These were not simply beasts, they were living symbols, physical manifestations of humanity's deepest fears. They were the embodiment of raw chaos, the consequences of divine wrath, the horrifying results of nature's laws being broken. From the hundred-handed giants who predated the Titans to the child-devouring demon born of grief, this bestiary of the bizarre reveals the anxieties of a world grappling with forces it could neither comprehend nor control. Chapter 8, The Hecatoncheires, the hundred-handed storm giants. A terrifying visage. Before the Titans, before the Olympians, there were the first children of Uranus the sky and Gaia the earth. Among them were three beings of such monstrous size and strength that their own father recoiled in fear. These were the Hecatoncheires, the hundred-handed ones. Their names were Cottus the striker, or the furious, Briareus the vigorous, also called Aegean by mortals, and Gyges the big-limbed. Their appearance was a nightmare of chaotic anatomy. Each giant possessed 50 heads, capable of blustering the storm winds, and 100 powerful arms, which they used to wield the very clouds. They were not gods in the typical sense, possessing no divine domain, but were rather personifications of the most violent and destructive forces of nature: earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and furious sea storms. The first prisoners. Uranus, the primordial sky god, was horrified by these powerful and grotesque children. Fearing they would one day usurp him, he took them as soon as they were born and thrust them deep into the earth, imprisoning them in the darkest pit of the underworld, Tartarus. In some versions, he pushed them back into the womb of Gaia herself, an act that infuriated the Earth Mother and led her to conspire with her son Cronus to overthrow Uranus. When Cronus took power, however, he proved no better a ruler. He left his hundred-handed brothers to languish in their subterranean prison, still fearing their immense power. There they remained, guarded by the great dragon camp, through the entire golden age of the Titans. The ultimate weapon in the Titanomachy. For 10 long years, the great war between the new Olympian gods and the ruling Titans, the Titanomachy, raged with no clear victor. It was then that Gaia, the ancient Earth Mother, revealed a prophecy to her grandson Zeus. He could only achieve victory with the help of the prisoners in Tartarus. Zeus descended into the underworld, slew the guardian camp, and freed his giant uncles. He restored their strength with nectar and ambrosia, the food of the gods, and asked for their aid. The Hecatoncheires, eager for vengeance against the Titans who had left them imprisoned, readily agreed. Their entry into the war was the decisive moment. The Hecatoncheires unleashed their full, cataclysmic power upon the Titans' stronghold of Mount Othrys. With their 300 collective arms, they pelted the Titans with a continuous barrage of massive boulders, a storm of stone that no defense could withstand. Overwhelmed by this display of raw, brute force, the Titans were finally defeated. The Eternal Wardens. After their victory, Zeus cast the defeated Titans down into Tartarus, the very prison from which the Hecatoncheires had been freed. To ensure the old gods could never again threaten the cosmos, Zeus appointed the Hundred-Handed Ones as their eternal jailers, guarding the bronze gates of the underworld prison. It is worth noting that a lost epic poem, also called the Titanomachy, may have preserved an older, conflicting tradition in which the Hecatoncheires fought on the side of the Titans, not the Olympians. This confusion only adds to their mysterious nature as beings of pure, untamable force, whose allegiance is not to a particular ideology but to the raw power they represent. The Hecatoncheires are the personification of overwhelming, brute force and the chaotic power of the earth itself. Their physical description is not meant to be taken literally but to convey a sense of incomprehensible, multifaceted power. They are consistently linked to geological and meteorological phenomena like storm winds and earthquakes. Their key action, hurling hundreds of rocks at once, is a perfect metaphor for a volcanic eruption or a catastrophic landslide. The story of their imprisonment and release symbolizes the struggle of a civilizing sky god like Zeus to control and strategically deploy the untamable power of the earth. Zeus does not defeat them, he co-opts them. They remain a terrifying, primordial force, now repurposed to guard the prison of the old order. Chapter 9, Lamia, the child-devouring queen of sorrows. From beauty to beast. Not all monsters are born of primordial chaos, some are forged in the crucible of human tragedy. Such is the story of Lamia, whose myth begins not with monstrosity but with beauty and love. In most accounts, she was a queen of Libya, a mortal woman of such stunning beauty that she captured the attention of Zeus himself. She became his lover and bore him several children. This affair, however, invoked the terrible wrath of Zeus's jealous wife, Hera. In a fit of vengeful fury, Hera destroyed all of Lamia's children. Some versions of the myth are even crueler, telling that Hera did not kill the children herself but inflicted a madness upon Lamia that forced the queen to kill her own offspring. A monster forged by grief. The loss of her children shattered Lamia's mind and soul. Overwhelmed by a grief so profound it twisted her very being, her outer beauty warped to reflect the monstrous hatred and sorrow within. She transformed into a terrifying creature, a half-human, half-serpent demon whose name, derived from the Greek for gullet, or gluttonous, became synonymous with her new, horrific purpose. Driven by a twisted desire for revenge, she began to hunt and devour the children of other mothers, ensuring that they would feel the same pain that had been inflicted upon her. Bizarre abilities and features. The myths surrounding Lamia are filled with bizarre and grotesque details. Pitying her torment, Zeus was said to have granted her two gifts, prophecy, and the truly strange ability to remove and replace her own eyes at will. This allowed her to find some rest from the horrifying visions that haunted her, though it also meant she could be tricked. Her physical form was a subject of morbid fascination. While most commonly described as having the upper body of a woman and the lower body of a serpent, other descriptions were even more grotesque. The comedy playwright Aristophanes depicted her as a hermaphroditic creature with the stench of a seal, the unwashed balls of a lamia and the arse of a camel. This depiction of a being that violates the boundaries of gender was likely intended to make her seem even more twisted and unnatural. Ancient vase paintings show her as a hairy, menacing figure with enormous breasts, sharp talons, and fangs. The ancient bogeyman. Over time, Lamia's tragic story faded, and she evolved into a stock figure of horror. In ancient Greece, she became a common bogeyman, a name invoked by mothers and nannies to frighten naughty children into obedience. The threat of being eaten by Lamia was a powerful tool of discipline. In later classical periods, her myth shifted again. The Lamii became a type of phantom or night-haunting spirit, synonymous with the Empusai. These demons took the form of beautiful, sultry women who would seduce young men, satisfying their sexual appetites before feeding on their flesh and drinking their blood. This transformation made Lamia an early prototype of the vampire, a seductive and deadly predator. This version of the myth inspired the famous poem, Lamia, by John Keats, cementing her image as a beautiful but monstrous seductress in the modern imagination. Lamia is a myth about the monstrosity of grief and a powerful patriarchal cautionary tale. Unlike many monsters, her origin is not primordially evil, she is a human queen made monstrous by suffering inflicted by a goddess. Her specific crime, devouring children, is a horrific inversion of the maternal role, the primary social function of women in ancient Greece. Her transformation into a half-serpent connects her to chthonic, dangerous, and often female-coded forces. The myth therefore serves a dual purpose. It is a tragic exploration of how profound loss can corrupt a soul, but it also functions as a tool of social control, a terrifying image of what happens when a woman's grief and sexuality, her affair with Zeus being the root cause, become unconstrained and turn against the patriarchal order's most valued asset, its children. Chapter 10, The Chimera, a blasphemy of nature's design. The ultimate hybrid. In the wild lands of Lycia in Asia Minor, there lived a creature that was a living blasphemy against the natural order, the chimera. Its very form was a chaotic and terrifying assemblage of different animals, a monstrous hybrid that should not exist. According to the descriptions of Homer and Hesiod, the chimera had the forepart of a lion, the midsection of a goat, and the hindquarters of a great serpent or dragon. To make its form even more grotesque, a second head, that of a goat, protruded from the middle of its back. Its tail was not a tail at all, but another living creature, a venomous snake that would strike at its enemies. Some depictions even gave it leathery dragon's wings. The creature's name itself, from the Greek chimera, simply means she-goat, a strange and understated name for such a multifaceted horror. The breath of fire. The chimera's most deadly weapon was its ability to breathe fire. This torrent of flame was said to emanate not from the lion's mouth but from the goat's head that grew from its spine. With this fiery breath, it devastated the countryside of Lycia, burning fields and killing cattle, a bane to all who lived there. Monstrous lineage. The Chimera was born into a veritable dynasty of monsters. It was the offspring of two of the most fearsome primordial beings in Greek mythology, Typhon, the monstrous storm giant who once challenged Zeus for supremacy, and Echidna, the half-woman, half-serpent mother of monsters. Its siblings were a rogues gallery of horrors, including Cerberus, the three-headed hound of Hades, and the Lernaean Hydra, the many-headed water serpent. Raised by the king of Caria, Amisidaris, the Chimera was a creature of divine stock, bred for destruction. The hero and the flying horse. The task of slaying this impossible beast fell to the hero Bellerophon. Exiled from his home and sent to the court of King Iobates of Lycia, Bellerophon was given the task as a suicidal mission. The king hoped the monster would kill the hero for him. Bellerophon knew he could not face the creature on foot. Trusting in the signs of the gods, he sought out and tamed the magnificent winged horse, Pegasus. Riding on Pegasus's back, he could soar above the Chimera, staying out of reach of its powerful lion claws and striking serpent tail. As he flew above the beast, it unleashed plumes of fire from its goat head, but Pegasus was swift enough to evade the flames. Realizing that brute force would fail, Bellerophon devised an ingenious strategy. He affixed a large block of lead to the tip of his spear. Diving down towards the monster, he waited for it to open its goat mouth to breathe another torrent of fire. At that moment, he hurled the spear directly into its fiery gullet. The intense heat of the Chimera's own breath melted the lead, which then poured down its throat and into its vital organs, burning and suffocating the monster from the inside out. In a final, bizarre twist, the Roman poet Virgil claimed that the Chimera's spirit did not perish but joined its brother Cerberus as a guard at the gates of the underworld. The real Mount Chimera. The myth of the Chimera, as fantastic as it seems, likely has its roots in a real and striking natural phenomenon. In Lycia, in modern-day Turkey, there is a place known as Mount Chimera Yenitas, where methane and other flammable gases seep out of vents in the rock and have been burning for thousands of years. These eternal flames, erupting from the mountainside, could easily have inspired the legend of a fire-breathing monster dwelling within the rock. The Chimera is a living symbol of the unnatural and the deceptive. Its name has become a common word for any fantastic or impossible idea, a figment of the imagination. The myth of its defeat is a powerful allegory for how ingenuity in a higher perspective can overcome a seemingly impossible, multifaceted problem. Bellerophon cannot defeat the monster on its own terms. He requires Pegasus, a divine gift that allows him to literally rise above the problem. His solution is based not on strength but on cleverness, using the monster's own power against it. The myth teaches that complex, chimerical, threats cannot be faced with simple, head-on force, but require a change in perspective and a strategy that turns the threat's own nature into its undoing. Part 4, Whispers of Fate, Oracles, Mysteries, and Secret Knowledge. In the ancient Greek world, the gods were not distant, silent beings. They communicated with mortals, offering glimpses of the future, guidance in times of crisis, and promises of a life beyond the grave. But this divine knowledge was not freely given. It was veiled in secrecy, spoken in riddles, and revealed only to those who underwent sacred and often terrifying rites. From the cryptic pronouncements of wandering prophetesses and the ecstatic trances of Apollo's priestess to the secret ceremonies that promised salvation, the quest for divine knowledge was one of the most powerful forces in ancient religion. These institutions were the gateways to the divine, places where the veil between worlds grew thin and mortals could, for a moment, hear the whispers of fate. Chapter 11, The Sibyls and the Oracle, Voices of Divine Will. The Wandering Prophetesses. Long before the famous oracle at Delphi, there were the Sibyls. These were not a single, organized priesthood but a series of legendary prophetesses scattered across the ancient world, from Persia and Libya to Erythraea and Cumae in Italy. They were women of immense and indeterminate age, believed to have existed since before the dawn of civilization. The philosopher Heraclitus, writing in the 5th century BCE, claimed of the Sibyl that, with frenzied mouth uttering things not to be laughed at, unadorned and unperfumed, yet reaches to 1,000 years with her voice by aid of the god. They were known to inhabit sacred caves and chant their oracles, foretelling apocalyptic events of great significance. The Sibylline Books of Rome. The most famous story concerning a Sibyl involves the 7th and final king of Rome, Tarquin the Proud. An ancient, wizened woman, the Sibyl of Cumae, appeared before the king and offered to sell him 9 books of prophecy at an exorbitant price. Tarquin scoffed and refused. In response, the Sibyl calmly threw 3 of the books into a fire and offered the remaining 6 to the king for the same original price. Again, Tarquin refused, thinking her mad. The Sibyl then burned 3 more books and offered the final 3 for the full, original price. Struck by her unwavering resolve, the king finally relented and purchased the last 3 books. These Sibylline books became Rome's most sacred and closely guarded treasure. They were kept in a consecrated chamber beneath the Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill and were consulted only in times of extreme national crisis, not to foretell the future, but to determine the correct ritual procedures to appease the gods and remedy the situation. The original books were destroyed in a fire in 83 BCE, but the Romans sent envoys across the world to collect similar prophecies to replace them. The Christian Sibyls. In the later Roman Empire, the figure of the Sibyl was co-opted by a new religion, Christianity. Early Christian and Jewish writers, inspired by the pagan tradition of Sibylline prophecy, created a new set of texts known as the Sibylline Oracles. These works portrayed the ancient pagan prophetesses as having foretold the coming of Jesus Christ. The most famous of these stories involves the Tiburtine Sibyl, also known as Albunia. According to the legend, the Roman Emperor Augustus, contemplating whether he should allow himself to be worshipped as a god, consulted the Sibyl. At noon on the day of Christ's birth, the Sibyl showed the emperor a vision in the sky, a golden ring around the sun, and in its center, a beautiful virgin holding a child. A voice was heard, saying, "This woman is the altar of heaven," and the Sibyl told Augustus, "This child will be greater than thou." The legend states that Augustus then erected an altar on the site, which later became the Church of Santa Maria in Ara Coeli, St. Mary of the Altar of Heaven, in Rome. The Oracle at Delphi. While the Sibyls were wandering, semi-mythical figures, the most powerful prophetic voice in the classical world was fixed at a single, sacred location, the Oracle at Delphi. Here, on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, in a temple dedicated to Apollo, a specific priestess known as the Pythia delivered prophecies from the god. For centuries, from the 8th to the 4th centuries BCE, her counsel was sought by kings, colonists, and commoners alike on matters of war, law, and religion. The ritual of prophecy. The process of receiving a prophecy at Delphi was a complex ritual. The Pythia was always a woman over the age of 50, chosen from the local peasantry, who lived a life of chastity. On the 7th day of the month, the day of consultation, she would first bathe in the sacred Castalian spring. She would then drink from another holy spring, the Cassotes, before entering the temple. Inside the temple was an inner, sunken sanctum called the Adyton, which was off limits to all others. There, she would mount a sacred tripod situated over a chasm or opening in the earth. Chewing leaves from the sacred laurel tree and inhaling the vapors rising from the chasm, she would fall into an ecstatic trance, allowing the spirit of Apollo to possess her and speak through her. Intoxicating fumes and ambiguous answers. The source of the Pythia's trance has long been a subject of intense debate. Ancient writers, including the priest Plutarch, attributed it to a sweet-smelling pneuma, or vapor, escaping from the chasm. Modern geological studies of the site have revealed that the temple sits directly on top of two intersecting geologic fault lines. It has been theorized that seismic activity could have heated underlying limestone deposits, releasing intoxicating hydrocarbon gases, such as ethylene or methane, into the Adyton. These gases, in a confined space, could have induced a euphoric, trance-like state. Whatever the cause, the Pythia's pronouncements were not clear, straightforward answers. She would rave in an ecstatic state, and her words, often unintelligible, would be translated, by the male priests of the temple into elegant but highly ambiguous hexameter verse. This ambiguity was the hallmark of the Delphic oracle. A famous example is that of Croesus, the fabulously wealthy king of Lydia. When he asked the oracle whether he should go to war with Persia, the Pythia replied that if he did, he would destroy a great empire. Confident in his interpretation, Croesus attacked the Persians and was utterly defeated. He had indeed destroyed a great empire, his own. The power of the Delphic oracle lay precisely in this ambiguity. It was not a simple fortune-telling service but a profound tool for moral and political deliberation. The cryptic nature of the prophecies forced rulers and individuals to reflect deeply on their own intentions and to bear the full responsibility for their interpretations. The process of consultation shifted the burden of certainty from the divine to the human. The god provided a sign, but the mortal had to decode its meaning. A consultation at Delphi was therefore not a passive reception of fate, but an active, high-stakes intellectual and moral exercise. A king who interpreted the oracle with hubris, like Croesus, would be destroyed by that hubris. The oracle did not just predict the future, it revealed the character of the person asking the question. Chapter 12, The Secret Rites, Eleusis and the Orphic Path. The Eleusinian Mysteries, a promise for the afterlife. For over 1,000 years, the small town of Eleusis, just outside Athens, was home to the most famous and revered secret religious rites in the ancient world. The Eleusinian Mysteries, held annually in honor of the grain goddess Demeter and her daughter Persephone, promised initiates not just a connection to the divine, but a blessed fate in the afterlife. Unlike many exclusive cults, initiation was open to anyone who could speak Greek and had not committed murder. Men, women, and even slaves were allowed to participate, provided they swore a solemn vow of secrecy, punishable by death if broken. The mysteries were based on the myth of Persephone's abduction by Hades, the king of the underworld. The rites reenacted Demeter's desperate search for her lost daughter, her grief which caused the earth to become barren, and her joyful reunion with Persephone, which brought life back to the world. The 9-day festival involved processions from Athens to Eleusis, ritual purifications, fasting, and sacrifices. The climax occurred inside a great hall called the Telesterion, where the initiates witnessed the secret rites. Though the exact details were never written down, the experience was said to be so profound that it transformed initiates and removed their fear of death. The Kykeon debate. At the heart of the Eleusinian experience was the consumption of a sacred drink known as the Kykeon, a mixture of barley, water, and mint, which Demeter herself drank in the myth. A tantalizing and highly debated theory suggests that the power of the mysteries came from a psychoactive ingredient in this drink. Scholars have proposed that the barley used to make the Kykeon may have been intentionally infected with ergot, a fungus that grows on grain and contains alkaloids that are precursors to LSD. If the priests of Eleusis had developed a method to extract the psychoactive compounds while mitigating the fungus's toxic effects, the Kykeon could have induced powerful, collective visions, explaining the profound, life-altering experiences reported by initiates for 2 millennia. However, despite the compelling nature of this theory, no definitive archaeological evidence has been found to prove it, and many scholars remain skeptical, arguing that the power of the mysteries lay in the psychological impact of the dramatic rituals themselves. Orphism, the path of purification. While the Eleusinian mysteries offered a shared, communal experience of salvation, another, more esoteric mystery cult known as Orphism offered a path of individual, ascetic purification. Based on the teachings and songs of the mythical musician Orpheus, Orphism was a countercultural movement with a complex and bizarre theology that stood in stark contrast to mainstream Greek religion. The bizarre Orphic cosmogony. The Orphics had their own unique creation myth, far stranger than the standard Olympian tales. They believed that in the beginning, there was Cronus Time, who created a cosmic egg in the ether. From this shining egg hatched the first primordial deity, Phanes, a beautiful, androgynous being with golden wings and the head of a lion. Phanes created the other gods, and eventually, Zeus swallowed Phanes, absorbing his creative power and remaking the universe. The central myth of Orphism, however, concerns the infant Dionysus Zagreus, the son of Zeus and Persephone. Jealous of the child, who was destined to inherit Zeus's throne, Hera incited the Titans to attack him. The Titans lured the baby with toys, then seized him, tore him to pieces, and consumed his flesh. Enraged, Zeus blasted the Titans with a thunderbolt, incinerating them. From their soot-covered ashes, humanity was born. The spark in the prison, Orphic theology. This gruesome creation myth had a radical and profound implication for Orphic belief: humanity possesses a dual nature. Our bodies soma are our prisons, or even our tombs sema inherited from the gross, earthly material of the evil Titans. But trapped within this titanic prison is a divine spark, our soul's psyche, which are a fragment of the god Dionysus whom the Titans had consumed. Life, for the Orphics, was a process of atoning for this original sin of the Titans. The goal was to purify the divine Dionysian spark and liberate it from the prison of the body. This could only be achieved through a strict, ascetic lifestyle, which included vegetarianism, since animals also had souls, and the avoidance of violence, and through participation in secret Orphic rites. They believed in metempsychosis, a grievous wheel of reincarnation. The uninitiated soul was doomed to be reborn indefinitely, trapped in a cycle of suffering. Only by living a pure Orphic life could the soul finally escape the wheel and reunite with the divine. Orphism represents a radical theological shift in Greek thought, introducing concepts remarkably similar to Eastern doctrines of karma and reincarnation, alongside a Western concept of original sin. Mainstream Greek religion was largely external and transactional. One makes sacrifices to the gods, who in turn grant favors. The afterlife was generally a grim, shadowy existence. Orphism, by contrast, introduced a complex, internalized theology. The problem was not offending an external god, but the inherent impurity of our own titanic nature. The solution was also internal, a life of purity and asceticism to cleanse the soul over multiple lifetimes. The core myth, that humans are born from the ashes of Titans who consumed a god, is a profound explanation for the duality of human nature, our capacity for both great evil and divine aspiration. This represents a level of philosophical and theological sophistication far removed from the standard Olympian myths, signaling a major evolution in religious consciousness. Part 5, Talismans of Power, Objects of Mythic Significance. In a world where the gods walked among mortals, their power was not always an abstract force. It could be invested in physical objects, talismans, weapons, and relics of immense power that could decide the fate of heroes and the destiny of entire civilizations. These were not mere, magic items, but complex symbols, tangible manifestations of divine will, terror, and authority. To possess one was to hold a piece of the divine, a power that could protect a city, legitimize a king, or strike fear into the hearts of an entire army. From the terrifying shield of Zeus to the city-saving statue of Troy, these artifacts were the focal points of mythic power. Chapter 13, the Aegis, the Fleece, and the Palladium. The Aegis, the face of terror. Wielded by both Zeus, the king of the gods, and his favored daughter Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war, the Aegis was the ultimate instrument of divine terror. Its exact form is a matter of conflicting descriptions in ancient sources. Sometimes it is depicted as a great shield, burnished and impenetrable. At other times, it is described as a breastplate or, most strangely, a shaggy goatskin cloak or shawl thrown over the shoulders. Its origins are equally bizarre and varied. One myth claims Zeus fashioned it from the skin of the monstrous giant Pallas, whom Athena defeated. Another, more common tradition, states that it was made from the hide of the goat Amalfi, the divine creature who had nursed the infant Zeus in the Cretan cave. This origin links the Aegis to Zeus's very survival and his rise to power. Regardless of its form, its power was absolute. When shaken, it could produce a sound like a myriad of roaring dragons and wrap mountains in clouds of thunder and lightning, striking mortals down with fear. But its most terrifying feature was added later. After the hero Perseus slew the Gorgon Medusa, he gifted her severed head to Athena, who affixed it to the center of the Aegis. Now, the shield not only inspired supernatural fear but also possessed the Gorgon's petrifying gaze, capable of turning any who looked upon it to stone. It was a weapon of psychological warfare, a symbol of the overwhelming and awful power of the Olympians. The Golden Fleece, the prize of kings. In the distant land of Colchis, at the edge of the Black Sea, hung a treasure of unparalleled significance, the Golden Fleece. This was the pelt of Chrysomelos, a fabulous winged ram with fleece of pure gold, which had been sired by Poseidon. The ram had been sent by the nymph Nephele to rescue her children, Phrixus and Helle, from being sacrificed. It carried them through the air, but Helle fell into the sea in the strait thereafter named the Hellespont while Phrixus was brought safely to Colchis. In gratitude, Phrixus sacrificed the ram to the gods and presented its golden fleece to the king of Colchis, Ares. The king hung the fleece on an oak tree in a grove sacred to the war god Ares, where it was guarded by a colossal, never-sleeping dragon. The fleece was not a weapon, but it possessed a potent magic of its own. It was the ultimate symbol of kingship and legitimate authority. To possess it was to have a divine right to rule. This made it the object of the epic quest of Jason and the Argonauts, who were sent to retrieve it by the usurper King Peleus in the hopes that they would perish in the attempt. The story of their journey and their eventual success, aided by the sorceress Medea who drugged the guardian dragon, is one of the great epics of Greek mythology. Over the centuries, many have tried to find a rational explanation for the myth. Was the fleece a symbol for the great wealth and technology of Colchis? Or did it refer to a real-world practice of placer mining, well attested in ancient Georgia, where sheepskins were submerged in streams to trap flecks of gold, literally creating a golden fleece? Other theories suggest it represented golden grain, a book on alchemy, or even a fabric woven from precious sea silk. The Palladium, the talisman of Troy. While the aegis was a weapon of offense and the fleece a symbol of authority, the Palladium was a talisman of pure protection. It was an ancient, sacred wooden statue Xoanon of the goddess Pallas Athena, which was housed in the citadel of Troy. According to legend, the statue had fallen from heaven, a direct gift from Zeus to the city's founder, Ilus. Its power was absolute and conditional. As long as the Palladium remained safe within the city's walls, Troy could not be conquered. This divine protection made it the single most important strategic objective for the Greeks during the Trojan War. The prophetic Trojan prince Helenus, captured by Odysseus, revealed this secret, making it clear that the city could not fall until the statue was removed. The perilous task of stealing the Palladium fell to Odysseus and Diomedes. The two heroes snuck into the city by night, infiltrated the temple of Athena, and carried the sacred image off, leaving Troy vulnerable to the final stratagem of the Trojan horse. The origin of the Palladium is, like many such artifacts, shrouded in conflicting myths. One bizarre version claims it was not made of wood at all, but from the shoulder bone of the hero Pelops, who had been famously cooked and served to the gods by his father. After the fall of Troy, the statue's fate became a matter of intense civic pride and rivalry. Numerous cities across Greece and Italy, including Athens, Sparta, and Argos, claimed to possess the true, original Palladium. The most famous claim was that of Rome, where it was said that the hero Aeneas had rescued it from the burning city and brought it to Italy, where it was eventually housed in the Temple of Vesta, guarded by the Vestal Virgins, ensuring the eternal safety of Rome. These three legendary artifacts represent three distinct modes of divine power interacting with the mortal world. The aegis is a symbol of raw, overwhelming terror. Its power is to induce fear and panic, rooting armies without a fight, representing the awesome and terrifying force of the divine. The golden fleece is a quest object that bestows the right to rule. It does not have active combat powers but grants legitimacy and authority to the one worthy enough to undertake the heroic journey to acquire it. The Palladium is a static, defensive talisman. Its power is a sacred pact between a city and its patron deity. As long as it is honored and protected, the city is safe. Together, they form a mythological triad exploring the very nature of power itself. Power as overwhelming force, power as earned right, and power as a sacred, protective trust. Conclusion: the enduring power of the weird. The journey through the fringes of mythology is a disorienting one. It is a landscape of clashing shields and ecstatic cries, of sunken continents and utopian realms, of monstrous hybrids and child-devouring demons. The stories are often contradictory, the genealogies hopelessly tangled, and the details profoundly bizarre. Yet, it is in this very weirdness that their enduring power lies. These myths are not failed attempts at history or primitive science. They are, instead, remarkably successful attempts at mapping the vast, uncharted territory of the human psyche. The Charybants and Maenads, in their divine frenzy, give form to the human need for ecstatic release, for a temporary dissolution of the self in a power greater than one's own. The lost lands of Hyperborea and Atlantis are not points on a map but poles of the human condition, the serene, Apollonian ideal of perfect order and the tragic, cautionary tale of a society consumed by its own hubris. The monsters, the Hecaton chairs, Lamia, and the Chimera, are the architecture of our anxieties. They are the personification of overwhelming natural forces we cannot control, the embodiment of grief so profound it becomes monstrous, and the symbol of unnatural chaos that can only be defeated by a higher perspective. The secret rites of Eleusis and the strange theology of Orphism speak to an eternal human quest for meaning, for a promise of life beyond death, and for an explanation of the duality of good and evil that resides within us all. These stories have survived for millennia not because they are factual accounts of the past, but because they are timeless allegories of our inner lives. The labyrinth is the journey into our own subconscious to confront the Minotaur within. The Sibyl's ambiguous prophecy reminds us that the future is not a fixed point, but a landscape shaped by our own interpretations and choices. The crazier, the detail, a queen who can remove her eyes, magicians born from fingers pressed in the dirt, a blissful death achieved by leaping from a cliff, the more profound the psychological truth it often seeks to convey. They are echoes from the edge of the imagination, and they persist because, in their beautiful, terrifying, and utterly strange way, they are stories about us.